Hey, this is Ramon. Channel is Alpha 4, and I am going to talk about religion, which is something I said I wasn't going to do. But I figure with all the changes going on YouTube, who cares about stuff like that anymore, right? So let's not worry about the algorithm. Let's just go for it. And I've been doing something interesting lately. I've been collecting Bibles. And the NRSV is my favorite. Just as. And I got the expanded edition that not just has the Deuteronomical, apocryphal books, but also has the Ethiopian text. And I also happen to lack the skill to speak Spanish. So I decided to learn Spanish by reading a Spanish translation of the Bible, because I'm crazy like that. But I do have other translations of the Bible, and after I read a chapter in Spanish, I go back and I read it in English to make sure I know what I'm reading. So it's made me think about what it means and about what it's talking about. And I thought I'd share that with you guys, because I've read multiple translations. I've read, the New King James. I've read the NAB, the NRSV, as I said. And, I even have an NIV, which I haven't read yet. And I have a King James that I flip through every once in a while just to compare verses. But I'm rereading all of the Bible from the beginning. And I thought I'd share my thoughts with you. So let's talk about Genesis 1. Genesis 1 is interesting because it has the first creation myth in the Bible. Yes, you heard me say myth. And when I read it from the NRSV, it's very obvious a polemic. It's very obvious an argument, all of Genesis, an argument against the other commonly held ideas at that time. But now rereading it and reading it in a language I don't understand, followed by one of my previous translations that I've read, is that it strikes me as that Genesis Genesis 1 has very strong tones. It talks about what man is and what man was. Because the Hebrew people at that time, the Semitic people at that time, were around. Sargon of Akkad was Semitic. The Hebrews were first mentioned by an Egyptian pharaoh and as being conquered. Clearly, they weren't. There's a later inscription from I believe the Moabs. There's some question whether or not they were at the Great Battle of Kashesh, whatever. Great ancient battle. Look it up. So they were around. And that's the time period that they are putting their creation myth into the story. But they're putting their creation myth starting at a time when other great civilizations were already around. The Egyptians, the Mesopotamian in the Sumerian was around. The Akkadians were just getting going. So you're talking about a time period somewhere between 2,300 and 1,300 BC is when their creation myth happens. Okay, now 5,000 years of existence, whatever that kind of stuff is. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm just talking about the time period that their story was created or told for the first time. And what they're saying is very strong, because they are going from a nomadic hunter-gatherer society into a farming society, into a gardening society. See where I'm going there? And they say something profound. talking about God gifting humankind the authority over the earth, over the plants and the animals. But I think that's a slightly misinterpretation, because we're able to take a dead thing and turn it into shelter. We're able to mass kill animals for food. We're able to turn animals into clothing, to take their skins and layer them on top of our skins. This is a profound change in nature. And what it says, the mandate that man will control nature, is, I think, slightly misinterpreted, because what it's saying is something interesting. And think about what that means during this time in the storytelling of the Hebrews, specifically the Israelites. And you got to remember that when this story was orally spoken for the first time, the Israelites are coming from a nomadic hunter-gatherer society into an agrarian society, into a gardening society. You know, they're creating a garden, farming. And there are other cultures in this time period that had been established. China, Indian cultures in this valley that are already thriving long before the Semitic people in the Levant they start developing a culture or a society. But think about what that means, what going from a hunter-gatherer nomadic society into a civil society means. Think about the power over nature. Just think about this in your mind. Why is it that in your neighborhood, if you live in a suburb like I do, if you do, why is it that the deer and the jackrabbits and the coyotes or wolves or jaguars or bobcats, depending on where you live, bears, why don't they just always constantly roam into your neighborhood? I mean, sure, every once in a while you see one or two, but why isn't that always a constant thing? And why is, as a city expands, do the animals start to disappear? Think about what that says about the power of man to protect yourself from nature. The ability for humans to conquer nature. See, I think taking that first chapter as a mandate is a mistake. I think it's stating a condition. I think it's saying mankind has gone from being subject to nature to being able to control nature. And with that comes certain responsibilities, what we would call ethics, what they would call morals. And I think that's the correct way to interpret Genesis 1. And yeah, there's other stuff about, other creation myths that were around before that would have influenced it. And yeah, there's stuff about, what time period the story actually takes place and all of that, or trying to find the location. But I think that's the wrong point, because the Semitic people that were in Mesopotamia could easily be connected to the Semitic people that are later in the Levant. The idea that there was no cross-pollination between cultures, between Egypt and the Hittites and the Mesopotamians and the Canaanites and the Phoenicians is insane. Obviously, there was cross-culture pollination going on. And not just through trade, but through ideas. And to think that there wouldn't be misunderstandings between cultures of what certain things were would be insane. There's misunderstandings now from people from city to city, from state to state. There's misunderstandings between neighbors. So of course, between ancient cultures, there can be misunderstandings. I think that's the wrong way to look at it, trying to disprove it on a skeptical standard because there are inconsistencies in the ideas compared to the ideas of a modern man. I think that's the wrong approach, because they didn't have modern science. They didn't have the discoveries that we have now. What they had was the profound revelation that they could now control nature instead of being subject to it. And what you had was great leaders, these people who wrote these books, these great thinkers who started telling these stories, these great orators and storytellers saying, look at what you're able to do and look at the responsibility that comes with it. And I think that's the seed, that's the beginning of the idea. Anyway, that's Genesis chapter 1. I hope you enjoyed my interpretation. And I plan on doing this for the Tao Te Ching and the Art of War. I don't know how many times I'm going to keep doing this with the Bible, but I plan on reading this whole thing. So maybe get at least one of these a week, if not more. Peace, like and subscribe.